Arun.
Shall we start?
Start, man.
Okay, is it audible?
Yes.
Audible and visible, no? Okay. Okay, we'll discuss about the management of tetralogy of Alec today. Coming on to medical management of cyanotic spell, that is one commonly asked question for us. The aim of therapy, last week we have discussed how cyanotic spell occurs. Now, how to overcome this cyanotic spell? What is the management? The first basic step is to console the child and reduce its cardiac output. So that is the main important thing. And the knee chest position, oxygen therapy, and calming the child. The aim of therapy is to overcome the acute imbalance between systemic vascular resistance and increased imbalance between SVR and PVR, relieving the pain and anxiety so that the heart rate decreases and the systemic oxygen consumption decreases. So basic step is to assume knee chest position and calming down the child and giving oxygen therapy. If no improvement occurs with these basic steps, then the following measures are to be taken in the same order. That is, first IV fluids. IV fluids are very important. So either crystalloids or colloids can be given, but most commonly used is crystalloid, normal saline, 10 to 20 ml per kg body weight, given as a bolus, will increase the intravascular volume. It will maximize the preload and improve the cardiac output, thereby increasing the mixed venous oxygen content. Okay, this is the first thing to be done. Then secondly, intravenous and or intramuscular morphine has to be given. The dose is 0.5 to 0.2 mg, 0.1 to 0.2 mg per kg should be given to relieve the anxiety and pain. It is a non-specific histamine release, causes venodilation. As a result, it decreases the venous return. So it decreases the deoxygenated blood coming to the right side of the heart. That is one mechanism. And secondly, it decreases the endogenous catecholamine release, thereby reducing the heart rate, lowers the respiratory rate. So these are the two mechanisms. So that is, one is by decreasing the venous return, and secondly by decreasing the catecholamines. By these two mechanisms, morphine works. Then coming on to intravenous propranolol, however, it is not available. So commonly used in our institutes and all, it will be metoprolol or oral propranolol they use. So we can use, among the available drugs in India, we can either use short-acting esmolol, 0.5 mg per kg, given over 1 minute, continued as infusion at 50 to 200 micrograms per minute, or metoprolol 0.1 mg per kg over 5-minute bolus, repeated every 5 minutes till maximum of 3 times. Unless, however, during this, we have to take care the patient does not go into bradycardia or hypotension. So, how beta blockers act? They have negative inotropic effect, and they lower the heart rate, decrease and improve the diastolic RV filling, thus increasing diastolic RV filling, increases the diastolic duration, increases the diastolic RV filling, thus increases the preload, overcome the infundibular narrowing. And if you use propranolol, which is also a alpha blocker, which is also a beta 2 receptor blocker, it is going to decrease the systemic vascular resistance, thereby, it is going to cause peripheral vasoconstriction, thereby increase the systemic vascular resistance and reduces right to left shunt. Coming on to, if after giving all this therapy also, if it doesn't subside, if the cyanotic spell is prolonged, then the baby is likely to have a metabolic acidosis, which need to be corrected by making use of sodium bicarbonate, 1 milliequivalents per kg, because this acts, if metabolic acidosis is not corrected, it itself will act on respiratory center and also the chemoreceptors and trigger further hyperapnea and helps in the perpetuation of the vicious cycle of cyanotic spell. In unremitting cases, intrasystemic vasoconstrictors may have to be administered, like phenylephrine at the dose of 5 to 10 microgram per kg bolus every 10 to 15 minutes, or 2 to 5 microgram per kg per minute, given as an infusion. I think commonly used is these bolus doses. Or you can use norepinephrine at the dose of 0.05 to 1 milligram per kg per minute.
Arun, they asked, no, like, how do you dilute phenylephrine? How much you'll give? If somebody asks, any idea about that?
I don't know. Anesthetists usually give. I don't know. Anybody knows? Usually, these anesthesia people give with bolus doses. Okay, we'll find out. In anesthesia with ketamine and followed by intubation and ventilation may ultimately be required to reduce the work of breathing and reduce the oxygen consumption and improve mixed venous oxygen content. This is as a last resort. Very occasionally, emergency BT shunting or mechanical circulatory support devices may become required. However, these kind of BT shunting or corrective surgery, emergency surgery are associated with poor post-operative outcome. Then many groups consider their onset as an indication for surgical correction. But if at all you want to wait, then if the baby is stabilized, then and you're planning to wait, then we can use oral beta blockers, propranolol, 0.25 to 1 mg per kg, given in 2 to 3 divided doses till the surgery is done. Okay, that's about these cyanotic spells management. Then coming on to the definitive treatment.
What is mechanism of propranolol? What is mechanism of propranolol to prevent cyanotic spell?
As a long-term therapy.
Yeah.
Long-term therapy, that is, it acts on, one is it reduces the heart rate, same as cyanotic spell, reduces the heart rate, increases the duration of diastole, improves the RV filling. As a result, it reduces the infundibulous stenosis. And secondly, it causes peripheral vasoconstriction, thereby reducing right to left shunt. Then coming on to
vasoconstriction.
Peripheral vasoconstriction, yeah. It is alpha beta 2 blocker, no? Beta 2 blocker.
Okay.
There will be unopposed alpha 1 action when beta 2 receptors are blocked by propranolol.
Then why it was used as antihypertensive? Then why metoprolol was used as antihypertensive and why it is
Metoprolol
used?
is acts only on beta 2 receptors, no? Sorry, beta 1 receptors, no? Metoprolol does not act on beta 2 receptors. It acts only on beta 1 receptors, very minimal action on beta 2.
Then what will it do to the BP?
Metoprolol, what happened?
What it will do to the SVR or BP?
It reduces contractility and it reduces the beta, heart rate, thereby reducing blood pressure.
Because of its negative inotropic effect, it will bring about some reduction in the blood pressure. Hello? Hello?
I don't know, I'm asking.
I don't know. Our voice was not audible for some time. Tell me.
No, I'm asking what is the mechanism? I don't know.
No, I told you didn't hear. Huh?
Yeah, I heard, but how will it increase SVR? That's what I'm asking. It is beta 1
Which
selective.
one?
No? Metoprolol.
Metoprolol will not increase. Metoprolol will not increase. Only propranolol.
Correct. Okay.
Only propranolol. That effect on systemic vascular resistance is only for propranolol, not for metoprolol. That's why propranolol is preferred.
Yeah, okay, got it.
But once again, tell that mechanism why it is used for prophylaxis.
See, propranolol is the best beta blocker for using for both prevention of cyanotic spell long-term therapy as well as during the cyanotic spell. Only thing, IV preparation is not available in India. So in Jaideva, I asked, they told we usually use oral propranolol itself during cyanotic spells also. So they give the dose of 1 mg per kg body weight. Both the mechanism of action is same both during cyanotic spell as well as in the preventive therapy. One is it has got action on both beta 1 receptors and beta 2 receptors. By beta 1 receptors are present in the heart, and by acting on that, it causes negative inotropy and negative chronotropic effect. As a result, the heart rate decreases. Once the heart rate decreases, the duration of diastole will be prolonged. So there will be better RV filling, better ventricular filling, more and RV filling. This in turn will reduce the infundibular stenosis. Like how better LV filling will help in prevention of LVOT obstruction in HOCM, no? Like that, if the RV is better filled, then it will prevent the infundibular narrowing. So as a result, the pulmonary blood flow will increase, better oxygenation will occur. That is at the level of heart. Then coming on to
peripheral vasodilatation because of peripheral vasoconstriction by acting on beta 2 receptors.
By acting on beta 2 receptors, propranolol only, it is applicable only for propranolol, not for metoprolol. The metoprolol also has got beta 2 action, but it is very minimal. They tell no, like cardioselective beta blockers. I think bisoprolol is highly cardioselective. That's why it is not at all. That's why it is most preferred in COPD patients. Beta 2 effect, some amount is there for metoprolol also, but it is very less. And by acting on the beta 2 receptors in the periphery, it causes peripheral vasoconstriction. Beta 2 receptors causes smooth muscle constriction in the vasculature. So beta 2 receptor causes vasodilatation at the periphery. So once those receptors are blocked, the vasoconstriction at the periphery occurs. As a result, SVR increases and the right to left shunt decreases. Okay, shall we continue?
Yes.
Okay, surgical correction. Coming on to, and apart from this, one more medical management thing is iron supplementation. So that is in order to prevent iron deplete erythropoiesis, because iron deplete erythropoiesis is associated with increased risk of hyperviscosity syndrome, because the RBCs become more sticky. There will be increased anisopoikilocytosis, and RBCs become more sticky, less its rheology will be lost, and hence causing thrombotic obstruction and other complications related to hyperviscosity syndrome. And they have to maintain adequate hydration. These are the important measures which they advise in the patient with cyanotic congenital heart diseases, especially TOF.
Around one doubt, why hyperviscosity syndrome will cause stroke in very less than 2 years and not less than 4 years and not after 4 years? Somebody
You
asked
only
this
told
question.
no. You only told no that they told some in less than you and Funny were discussed, no, that last class. They told if in less than 2 years there will be more of breastfeeding.
No. I'm asking. Okay, breastfeeding.
Breastfeeding and the inadequate water intake. Child will not be taking actively the water because of inadequate water fluid intake, and there won't be any iron-rich diet they will be taking actively. So, and after 2 years, once they start taking iron-rich food, that's
No, my doubt is they're having hypoxia-induced erythrocytosis both in young children less than 4 years also, and even after 4 years also. But however, the stroke is not common after 4 years. It is common only before 4 years. The reason, maybe only dehydration is explaining that, or any other reason is there? I'm asking.
I think that is the one thing. And secondly, they tell this iron rich food they start having after 2 years and other things. However, now I think iron rich tablets they give if they are diagnosed before, iron tablets and iron syrups as a supplement they give. But in diet, from dietary point of view, they won't be having any much of iron rich food at the age less than 2 years. No, that's why. Okay, shall we continue? Hello.
Yeah, you can continue.
coming on to surgical correction, there are two types of surgeries, mainly palliative surgeries and corrective repair. Just to sum, just we'll see this surgical steps in this flow chart. That is, if the patient is symptomatic or not, patient has to be surgery is a treatment of choice for all the tough cases, whether they are symptomatic or not. If not symptomatic, then complete repair at 6 to 12 months. If they are symptomatic, then it has to be considered even before 6 months of age. So then we have to look whether the associated conditions, whether the pulmonary arteries are hypoplastic, significant comorbid conditions, prematurity, low birth weight, abnormal crossing of coronary artery crossing RVOT, and age less than 6 months. These are the indication for going for palliative repair. On the other hand, the pulmonary arteries are of good size and age more than 3 years, you can directly go, and child is also not having a good weight, then better to directly go ahead with total repair. Coming on to palliation, we have percutaneous and surgical palliative therapy. Percutaneous therapy includes PDA stenting. If ductus arteriosus is patent, we can go for PDA stenting. Then RVOT stenting if predominant infundibulous stenosis. Balloon pulmonary valvuloplasty if predominant valvular pulmonary stenosis. Then coming on to surgical line of management, we have got modified BTE shunt and classical BTE shunt. Watson and Watterson shunt are not commonly done these days. Then coming on to if the pulmonary arteries of good size and total repair is required, then we can directly go ahead with total repair. If we are doing total repair, first we have to look for pulmonary valve annulus. If the pulmonary valve annulus is if the pulmonary valve annulus is of adequate size, then we can consider resection, RVOT resection, and closure of the VSD. With or without pulmonary valvotomy. If the pulmonary annulus is very small, that is more than 4 standard deviation below the normal value, then we have to consider for transannular patch. Then if there is coronary crossing RVOT, then we have to go for RV to PA conduit with and RVOT reconstruction.
Arun. There is error here. This -4 and this one.
Yeah, it should be less than -4.
Okay, it's
I
okay.
think it is like some people consider with minus or
that's okay.
That's why
the point
while
is
writing, better to write it like smaller than, lesser than, larger than, like that. If you write matter.
Correct. And second is Arun, I wanted to ask one thing. See this transannular patch, and another thing is RV to PA conduit. Okay. So transannular patch, okay, some pericardium or some homograft is taken, and the entire outflow tract is reconstructed. In conduit, that means any walled homograft or something.
No, not that. Not the walled homograft. This is commonly considered. Walled homograft is considered in the case of absent pulmonary valve. Top with absent pulmonary valve. There they use walled RV to PA conduit. That is also called as conduit only, but that will be a homograph RV to PA walled conduit that will be used. Here what they use is, in these cases, I think they use this RV to PA external conduit, like how they like this PTFE conduit and those things they use.
So they in the native that outflow tract which is stenosed, that is left, but the another this conduit, it bypasses from RV, it bypasses that RV outflow tract and directly joins the pulmonary artery like that. Okay. Then
this is in the case of like pulmonary arteries.
Double barrel something it is called, no?
I'm not sure. Double barrel.
That is not for top, I think.
Double barrel, I have not heard it anyway.
Applied. I think double barrel in certain post-op case I had seen in this one post-op echo, there will be double barrel appearance of the outflow tract. I think that is because of the conduit only.
Yeah, correct. It is double barrel. It creates a double barrel. When you don't want to incise on the RVOT, you put a second tube from RV to PA and create a double barrel.
That is called double barrel technique, huh?
Not technique, sure. But you create two ways to for.
No, there is something called double barrel technique. I've read it somewhere, but I don't know whether it applies to this one or something else.
I think Lokesh, in that case, Lokesh, I think it is not only conduit, maybe the transannular patch which they put, that also they put directly bypassing the native outflow tract.
Hello?
No, what I am telling is this double barrel, I think in the double barrel technique, they will be bypassing the native outflow tract with the help of pericardial patch only.
Okay.
And around one more thing, where is this Z score 4 is given? Previously it used to be 3, and then if it is still less than -7, se- that's how it used to be. No, where is this given? Apart from recently one presentation was there in this flow chart is there, but whether what we are taking, not sure. Any idea about this source?
I think the Indian guidelines is there. I'll show that. We'll see that once
In
again.
Indian guidelines also now they are not given about the Z scores.
They have not
They have
mentioned. Okay, I think this was from that presentation only.
This is from presentation, but previously we used to study like if it is less than -3 Z score, and if it is less than still less than -7, it is only palliative. That's how it used to be, no?
Okay, we'll confirm it once. I'll check with others.
If it is between,
You're sure these are -4 Z scores? I think it is -2 Z score. -4, you're sure Z scores?
No, I'm not sure. I'll just confirm it once.
now previously if it is like within 2 Z score, we without annular patch we do. If it is between -3 to -7, we do
Somewhere
patch
else, so apart
patch.
from this chart, somewhere else also I came across the same value. So I thought that it is correct. So if there is a doubt, I'll confirm with some consultants.
Okay.
We'll confirm it. Okay. Then timing of surgery in Indian guidelines, they are told all need surgical repair. Then if they are stable and minimally diagnosed, total repair at 6 to 12 months of age. That is the 1 minute. Yeah. So if they are stable and minimally diagnosed, total repair at 6 to 12 months of age or earlier, according to institutional policy, and symptomatic children less than 6 months, and having significant cyanosis, if possible, corrective surgery. If not possible due to various reasons mentioned, they can go for palliative surgery. Then if there is palliative surgery, we told already what are the types. Then lower threshold for earlier surgery if no requirement for transannular patch. Then patients having TAV with absent pulmonary valve was stable, medical management up to 1 year, followed by total correction with repair of pulmonary artery branch dilatation and aneurysm. Why they wait till 1 year is that plication of the pulmonary artery, and the results are better if done after 1 year. The repair of the pulmonary artery which are dilated and aneurysmal, the repair will be better if done after 1 year. That's why they usually try it for up till 1 year. Then patients with anomalous LAD crossing RVOT, then they will use RV to PA conduit as a class 1 recommendation. They provided the weight is more than 10 kg. If the weight is less than 10 kg, first do palliative aortopulmonary shunt and later on consider for RV to PA conduit surgery. Now coming on to briefly about this palliative surgeries. So primary corrective surgery when not feasible, like hypoplastic pulmonary artery, or if there is associated comorbidities, low weight and prematurity, or if the coronary is crossing RVOT, then these are the indications for considered for palliative procedures. So this palliation can be either done by surgical, like BT shunting, or enlargement of the RV, or percutaneously by RVOT shunting, PDA shunting, and balloon valvotomy. Valvoplasty. So balloon valvoplasty or valvotomy, the balloon pulmonary valvotomy is useful alternative to an aortopulmonary shunt and may allow later total correction in some patients with poorly developed pulmonary arteries or with associated complex intracardiac defects. But if the level of obstruction is predominantly at valvular level, then balloon valvotomy is going to be useful. But the disadvantage is it is not going to be adequate if level of obstruction is infundibular and supravalvular, and there will be subsequent risk of having cyanotic spells because it is not going to address the infundibulum. Then coming on to RVOT stenting. RVOT stenting, this is useful option in case of low birth weight, premature young child, unfavorable pulmonary artery anatomy, abnormal coronary distribution, and if the patient condition is critical, then we can consider for RVOT stenting. The problem with this is we are going to leave a foreign material in the RVOT, which may be difficult to extract at the time of surgery, whereas the endothelialization and fibrosis takes place. The stent migration, ventricular arrhythmias, and the collapse or the fracture of the stents and recurrent stenosis can happen. Because of this new endothelialization and muscular proliferation, it is going to distort the RVOT and maybe cause difficulty at the time of corrective surgery. Then coming on to PDA stenting, stent implantation in the PDA maybe maybe an alternative non-surgical approach for providing the pulmonary blood flow. So in the patient who have PDA, we can use this PDA stenting. Disadvantage is diastolic runoff of aortic blood into low pressure pulmonary circulation, and this in turn can predispose to end organ hypoperfusion and increases the risk of like Hirschsprung's disease and other things. Sorry, not Hirschsprung's disease. What is that? Some necrosis of the colon and happens. Now, what is that, Venkatesh? You may be knowing. What is it? Meconium ileus, huh?
Necrotizing enterocolitis.
Necrotizing enterocolitis. Sorry, correct. Necrotizing enterocolitis. It increases the risk of necrotizing enterocolitis. Then all those end organ hypoperfusion can happen. Then not an option in case of absent ductus or tortuous ductus, and higher likelihood of neointimal proliferation, and it may get occluded. The need for arterial vascular access during the procedure. Then coming on to surgical palliation. Surgical palliation includes the first one was classical BT stent, which is no longer used. This was end-to-side anastomosis using the subclavian artery and the pulmonary artery. So the subclavian artery used to be cut down and connected. As a result, on the same side, the radial pulse used to disappear, and also it used to predispose to vertebrobasilar artery insufficiency. Because of these disadvantages, classical BT stent is no longer performed, and presently performed is only modified BT stenting. Classical BT stenting is done on the side opposite to that of aortic arch, because we need to mobilize the subclavian artery for doing classical BT stenting. And the subclavian artery on the contralateral side will be directly originating as a branch from aorta and will be longer, thus it can be easily mobilized. Whereas in the case of modified BT stent, there is no need of mobilizing the subclavian artery, and it is commonly done on the same side of the aortic arch and through posterolateral thoracotomy or the midline thoracotomy. This is the area where we have to look for scar in the case if there is history of any stent surgeries. Then it is performed on the same side of the aortic arch. Lateral pulse will be preserved. No, there is no risk of having vertebrobasilar insufficiency. And the important thing to be remembered is the surgical mortality is less than 1%. However, if it is a planned modified BT stent, then it is 15% for periprocedural mortality.
Why it is done opposite to the arch? Again, many times asked question.
In classical BT stent, it is performed opposite side because subclavian artery on the opposite side can be easily mobilized because it is end-to-side anastomosis. No, so subclavian artery has to be cut, and that should be connected to the pulmonary artery, for which if it is easily on the opposite side, since the subclavian artery arises directly from aorta, it can be easily mobilized. The side opposite
left
to
or right. Suppose I have left aortic arch.
Right side we have to do because
why not left?
Sorry, I told other way around. I told other way around. The brachiocephalic artery will be there, no? So if it is originating from brachiocephalic artery, it will be easily mobilized.
Why you can mobilize left side also?
They told that opposite side is mainly because of that mobilization thing.
No, it is not mobilization. It is the angle. It is the angle which it makes. When it comes from brachiocephalic, it makes a 90-degree angle. When you take it from if suppose you are doing on left side, when you turn it down, that angle becomes very acute. So eventually it will get blocked.
Okay. Understood. Okay, thank you.
Arun, innondu, whether modified BT can be done either side, so it is always done on the same side of the arch.
Can be done either side.
Can be done on either side, I think, no?
But generally, what they follow is on the same side of the arch.
Generally followed is.
But what is followed is on the same side of arch.
Why
Yeah.
on the same side of the arch? Any reason is there for this, or it can be done on either side of the arch?
I don't know about the reason.
Reason I don't know, but commonly followed is on the same side. Reason I don't know. Then coming on to water sunshine, water sunshine and port shunt are no longer performed. That is anastomosis between the ascending aorta and the right pulmonary
And
artery.
what is the advantage of RVOT stenting? Because nowadays RVOT stentings are being done. All these questions were asked by Soumya madam.
RVOT stenting, better blood flow
Actually,
to both the lungs. As a result, the pulmonary artery blood flow,
do RVOT stenting rather than doing a BT shunt.
because advantage of RVOT stenting is it provides the blood flow to both the lungs. As a result, the growth of pulmonary arteries can be achieved on both the sides. With this BT shunt and all, we are going to connect to the one of the pulmonary arteries. No, so there will be preferential blood flow to the one lung, and the other side, the pulmonary arteries may not grow well. That is one reason they mention.
That is one reason. Plus, they distort the pulmonary artery anatomy.
Yeah, at
Even
the
if you-
site of anastomosis, pulmonary artery
But the
stenosis can
most
happen.
important reason is different. It is physiological blood flow. Normally, blood flow happens only in systole. If you do RVOT stenting, your flow will only happen in systole. If you do BT shunt, blood flow will be systole, diastole both.
Okay.
Is that pulsatile flow will cause the improved growth of the pulmonary
Better
arteries.
growth of pulmonary vasculature. Yeah, correct.
Okay.
Pulsatile flow.
Pulsatile flow will help in better growth of pulmonary arteries. Okay.
So it is considered as very good alternative to BT shunt. Actually, it is not like when you can't do other things, you do RVOT stenting. It is not like that. RVOT stenting can be done upfront. That is what most of the centers are doing nowadays. That's what Soumya madam told, but it's not given in textbook actually. I didn't see maybe.
Then port shunt, it is anastomosis between the descending artery and the left pulmonary artery. These were the central shunt done through median sternotomy incisions, and they are not used nowadays. Among them, the classical BT shunt and modified BT shunts are going to produce this continuous murmur, which if they are functioning normally.
Arun, one ನಿಮಿಷ. Arun, one more thing, the chat box are not there. Like how early we can do top correction surgery?
Total corrective repair.
Total corrective repair.
3 months.
3 months, huh? Like not before 3 months, Angara.
Before 3 months, if pulmonary arteries are of good size, we can, and babies also of adequate weight, I think they can do.
Okay.
That Indian guidelines was there, no? There I had mentioned.
Okay, and
Few
like
centers are doing as early as
Symptomatic, as early as possible. Symptomatic children less than 6 months of age with significant cyanosis or history of spell despite therapy, palliation, and if palliation and our total repair depending upon the center's experience. So I think before 3 months also, if the anatomy is good and baby is also of adequate weight, then they can do. Otherwise, they will do palliative, and once the baby is of adequate weight and pulmonary arteries are of good size, then they will do take for corrective repair.
okay, for before 3 months, it is like pulmonary artery anatomy. Like if they are like okay, good size and experienced center, you can do corrective surgery, and if there is history of one spell, and after that, like patient, I mean, baby is stabilized, and you have seen the child in between somewhere in 3 to 6 months, means you can do it up in 3 to 6 months also. Okay.
Okay. Then this was over. Then we'll so this is the image showing various type of shunt. This is the modified BT shunt. This is the water shunt done between ascending aorta and right pulmonary artery, and this is the port shunt done between descending aorta and left pulmonary artery. So these central shunts are not commonly used nowadays. Then coming on to other types of shunts like Davidson shunt, it is done from ascending aorta to main pulmonary artery with direct anastomosis. Okay. Then ascending aorta to direct pulmonary artery, here it will be done direct anastomosis. Then
Central shunts are
modified.
being done. I have done echo for so many central shunts.
Which one? Central
Quarter
shunts are done. Central shunts are done, but not port and this one. These are the central shunts which are done at present. Davidson also they want to modified Davidson and Melbourne shunt. These are the two ones which are done at present. Central shunts. So among the modified Davidson they do at present like from ascending aorta to MPA with PTFE tube, and Melbourne shunt, that is the central end-to side aortopulmonary shunt. That is the end-to side anastomosis of between the pulmonary artery and the aorta. So the pulmonary artery, which is small size, may be directly anastomosed to the aorta. This is what is given.
There
This
is
one.
like one is intrapericardial, the other central shunt and extrapericardial central shunt that are there. No, what are their names? Any idea? I heard that. I don't know.
No idea. That Sanu shunt and other things come. That is mainly for this hypoplastic left heart syndrome. There some more shunts are there which I have not mentioned here. You are telling about those?
No, I'm asking which shunt, central shunt is here done before they exit the pericardium and after they exit the pericardium, extrapericardial central shunts, intrapericardial central shunts. That.
No idea. Any idea? Anybody? Okay. Next, going on to indications for these central indications. That is neonates with pulmonary atresia, infants with hypoplastic pulmonary annulus, which requires transannular patch for complete repair. If the pulmonary annulus is small, that is one of the indication for postponing the surgery. In such a case, we may have to do these palliative shunts. Then children with the hypoplastic pulmonary arteries and unfavorable coronary artery anatomy, in which case late surgery is preferred. In such case, we have to do palliative procedures initially. Then infants younger than 3 months old who have medically unmanageable hypoxic spells, and infants with low birth weight. That's why before 3 months and low birth weight, Gautam, you asked, no? So usually they try to avoid because of increased perioperative mortality and other things. Only if everybody is ready for that high risk, then they may take. Then coming on to complications, difficult to select appropriate shunt size in small infants. Then diastolic runoff from that is complications of palliative shunts. Difficult to select appropriate shunt size in small infants. Then diastolic runoff from aorta into pulmonary artery because of lower pulmonary artery diastolic pressure and end organ hypoperfusion. The pulmonary arteries get distorted, as Lokesh told. There will be pulmonary artery may get distorted, especially narrowing at the anastomotic side, phrenic and vocal cord injury, then chylothorax, shunt narrowing and occlusion, then overcirculation and left ventricular volume overload can happen, leading on to hyperkinetic pulmonary hypertension and then obliterative pulmonary hypertension. So and also it causes selective perfusion of a single lung, and the other lung may not be perfused well. So pulmonary arteries on the opposite side may not grow well. So in that way, RVOT stenting is considered to be more physiological compared to these surgical shunts. So some debates used to happen. It seems like shunt versus stent. So they may ask the different questions like what is the shunt advantage and disadvantage of shunt versus stent. Okay. Then coming on to total repair. The goal of total repair is to VSD closure and relief of RVOT obstruction while maintaining the patency of the pulmonary valve as much as possible. So modest degree of RVOT obstruction with less regurgitation is currently preferred over complete relief of obstruction. So previously, in the beginning, they used to think that pulmonary regurgitation is a benign condition, and they used to don't give much importance for pulmonary regurgitation, and they used to do extensive RVOT resection, which used to cause severe pulmonary artery regurgitation, and they think that is benign, and no much importance was given. But later on, it is realized that pulmonary regurgitation also in the long run can lead to RV dysfunction and poor outcome. Hence, presently the goal is to achieve RVOT obstruction, to get relief of the RVOT obstruction reasonably well with minimal regurgitation as less as possible. And correction of the other major associated abnormalities like PDA and ASD, those also should be closed. Now coming on to early repair versus late repair. Age, what is the advantage and disadvantage of early repair versus late repair? Age at complete repair, if it is done in the neonatal period, there is a higher risk of hypoxic brain injury, increased ICU stay. If it is done during the infancy, then we have lower morbidity in the patient with there'll be a low there'll be low morbidity in the patient with 3 to 11 months of age group. Then if it is postponed too much, then it leads to RV hypertrophy and fibrosis. Because of repeated episodes of hypoxia, some RV hypertrophy fibrosis occurs, and there will be repeated episodes of cyanotic spells can lead to hypoxic brain injury, and there may be poor outcome. So what are the types of complete repair? So VSD closure is the main thing that is common for all, and along with that they have to do RVOT resection with pulmonary valvotomy, or infundibular patch with pulmonary valvotomy, or transannular patch, or RV2PA conduit. So transannular patch versus valve sparing repair. So transannular patch is done when the annulus is very small. How much small, whether about the result score, I'll once confirm with some consultants or other articles. Then no residual stenosis, late pulmonary insufficiency or ventricular dysfunction. But it is associated, transannular patch is associated with increased risk of going for pulmonary insufficiency. There will be a severe free PR and ventricular dysfunction, and pulmonary annulus will have, and that is the thing. And then valve sparing surgery is associated with the risk of residual stenosis, and however the advantage is it minimizes the pulmonary regurgitation. It can be considered when the pulmonary annulus is of relatively larger size. Coming on to transatrial versus transventricular approach. Initially, when the TOF repair started, when TOF repair started, it used to be transatrial. It used to be transventricular approach. Now, one minute. Some disturbance.
Arun bait barakoda.
No, he's also in meeting. I asked him to reduce his volume. Then transatrial versus transventricular approach. Then traditionally TOF was repaired by RV incision previously, but it was associated with increased risk of having arrhythmia and RV dysfunction post-operatively, and hence now transatrial approach going through RA is preferred. So presently the approach is transatrial approach plus through pulmonary. Transatrial approach is the one which is commonly performed at present. However, the right atrial approach is the one along with, if required, transpulmonary approach, pulmonary artery approach is the one which is performed at present. It is associated with better preservation of the RV function, better RV function, and because ventriculotomy is not going to be done. But what is the disadvantage with the transatrial approach is they are going to remove the septal leaflet of the tricuspid valve. As a result, the patient can have post-operative tricuspid regurgitation. That is the disadvantage of transatrial approach. So going through the right atrium, through the tricuspid valve, usually the septal leaflet of the tricuspid valve is going to be opened, and through that they will do the VSD closure. And in the case of, so as a result, post-operatively, the patient is at a risk of having tricuspid regurgitation. In the case of transventricular approach, they are going to incise all along the right ventricle. This in turn will increase the risk of scar formation over the right ventricle, arrhythmias, and RV dysfunction. Then RV to PA conduit used whenever there is pulmonary atresia, anomalous coronary artery crossing RVOT, or if there is marked hypoplasia of the RVOT. So here is the image, like arterial conduit from RV to PA. So it is extra conduit, extra conduit, that extra cardiac conduit that is placed from right ventricle to pulmonary artery without doing anything to the RVOT, native RVOT. So this can be either homograph conduit or Contegra, that is walled bovine jugular vein conduit, or Honka conduit. Usually walled conduits will be used whenever there is absent pulmonary valve. Then coming on to immediate immediate complications following TOF repair. There can be these are the things which we look in the post-op echoes, like residual RVOT obstruction. If the gradient is more than 30, then that is considered as something significant. RVOT, isn't it? Hello?
Arun, go on,
Hello?
go on. Arun, go
Gradient
on,
more
Nikhil.
than 30, no? Peak gradient across the RVOT more than 30 is considered as significant, no? Post-op repair.
Some people say even 40, but yeah, 30 is acceptable.
More than 30 or 40, they considered further whether to need to reopen and other things. Then residual VST, usually small VSTs can be present. However, it is significant, then it can lead to LV dysfunction and need to be addressed. So small residual VST is acceptable. Then pulmonary regurgitation, which is common, very much common if transcatheter patch is used. However, in the immediate perioperative period, it won't cause much complications, and it is going to cause late onset RV dysfunction and need to be addressed later. Then tricuspid regurgitation can happen because during the surgery, if transatrial approach is used, there will be damage to the subvalvular apparatus and also the septal leaflet of the tricuspid valve, and hence they can develop tricuspid regurgitation. RV dilatation occurs secondary to severe or prolonged pulmonary regurgitation. Then RV diastolic dysfunction, common in immediate post-operative period. This is usually diagnosed by making use of pulse wave Doppler, which shows Reddington wave. That is, when we put pulse wave Doppler across the right ventricular outflow tract or the pulmonary artery, we are going to get a pulmonary artery antegrade flow matched to the atrial systole. Since there is, if transacellular patch is used, there won't be any valve between the right ventricle and the pulmonary artery. And if it is non-compliant, the atrial systole will be, the impulse of atrial systole will be direct, the pressure of atrial systole will be directly transmitted to the pulmonary artery going through the right atrium, and it is going to produce a antegrade flow wave in the pulmonary artery. During atrial systole, it will there will be antegrade flow in the pulmonary artery, which is normally not supposed to happen in the absence of diastolic dysfunction. This kind of wave we will get, that is called as Reddington wave. It indicates immediate post. If that is there, then that is indicates RV diastolic dysfunction. If this RV diastolic dysfunction, if it is present, it is associated with the poor immediate post-operative outcome because it decreases the cardiac output. Then RV systolic dysfunction, many factors may contribute to it, mainly chronic volume overload due to severe PR, RV dilatation, ischemia, fibrosis, increased wall stress, or if RV aneurysm or echinesis, or poor myocardial protection during the repair. These can lead to RV dysfunction. So post-op repair, patient can have following complications like pulmonary regurgitation, which causes RV volume overload, RV dilatation. There will be decrease in RV mass to volume ratio, RV free wall stress increases, and RV dysfunction sets in. Secondly, it can lead to infundibular. We are going to do infundibuloplasty, which it can infundibular resection. So this in turn may be associated with one is it causes increase in the LV and systolic volume index. Then RVOT patch fibrosis will happen. Then RV aneurysm formation and echinesis can happen. Then following TOF repair, majority of the patients will have RVBP. This in turn can lead to ventricular desynchrony, diffuse myocardial fibrosis. There can be even because of interventricular dependence, there will be LV function also get impaired. Then coming on to long-term complications, same RV dysfunction secondary to TR, PR, and LV dysfunction can happen because of inadequate myocardial protection during the initial repair, residual VSTs, long-standing systemic to pulmonary shunts, or impairment of altered RV mechanics. Then aortic regurgitation, this occurs, this may be due to damage to the aortic valve during VST closure, or due to dilatation of the aortic root. This can be either due to TOF per se or because of surgery. Both will contribute to it. And rarely the aortic regurgitation will lead to, when the aortic root is markedly dilated, they can have even aortic dissections. Then ventricular tachycardia and sudden cardiac death. The sustained VT is thought to be the underlying cause of sudden cardiac death in population. And the risk factors for this is RV dysfunction, RV dilatation, QRS more than 180 milliseconds, progressive prolongation of QRS complex, and LV dysfunction. These are the important predisposing factors for sudden cardiac death. Coming on to atrial tachyarrhythmias, atrial flutter and fibrillation can happen as a late complication in 1/3 of the adult population. They can have other conduction abnormalities. RBPB is almost universal. In one of the case study, it was found in 91% of the population, and 15% of the patient will have RBPB with left axis, left anterior ME block causing left axis deviation. However, this does not indicate this does not consider as a predictor of CHP. Some of the patients CHP can happen either in the immediate post-operative period, and it may recover, and if it fails to recover, sometimes it may persist, and that may be an indication for permanent pacemaker implantation. This occurs mainly because of damage to the AV node during VST repair. Second, small percentage of patients may require permanent pacing. MRI has become the preferred modality for longitudinal follow-up of post-op repair patients, especially if they have PR, for assessing the PR regurgitant fraction and for assessing the RV function. Then coming on to treatment for pulmonary atresia. So the medical management here, one thing to be added is since TOF with pulmonary atresia is a ductus dependent condition, and if the ductus is patent in them, we have to give them prostaglandin even infusion at the lowest possible maintenance dose should be given. Then cyanotic spells need to be managed as in the case of TOF. Then palliative procedure to increase the pulmonary blood flow, PDA shunting or systemic to pulmonary artery shunting can be done. And one more thing is unifocalization. Unifocalization can be either done at the time of palliative procedure, or it can be done at the time of complete repair. So to decrease the so some of the patients with TOF with ventricular pulmonary atresia can have increased pulmonary blood flow due to excessive MAPCAS. In such case, we may have to do the interruption of the major aortopulmonary collaterals. And then coming on to complete repair, if pulmonary arteries are amenable to reconstruction, then complete repair is indicated by RV to PA conduit. Then comes the unifocalization. What is unifocalization? Unifocalization involves disconnecting all the MAPCAS from their aortic origin and connecting them to the vicinity of the heart, usually to the central confluence. That is where right and left pulmonary arteries are originate. To that point, usually they anastomose for final connection to the right ventricle. So connection between non-communicating segments are created, and a single source of blood flow is provided by the unifocalized is provided. Single source of blood. The aim of unifocalization is to provide a single source of blood flow from the pulmonary artery. Ultimate aim is to interruption of all extracardiac sources of pulmonary blood flow, incorporation of at least 14 segments. This we have to remember, at least 14 segments to the RV, so has to establish a single source of blood flow. And another thing is central pulmonary artery should be at least 50% of the normal diameter, and at the end of the unifocalization, RV pressure should be less than 70% of the LV pressure. So all these criteria should be fulfilled after performing unifocalization. This is one of the figure showing how the unifocalization is done. It is a time-consuming procedure and complex procedure. Like here we can see this is the aorta, descending arch of the aorta, descending aorta. Here we can see multiple MAPCAS coming from the descending aorta. These are all the various MAPCAS, and this is one more coming from the subclavian artery. So what they will do is they will incise these MAPCAS and anastomose them to the central pulmonary artery. This is a central pulmonary artery. Here you can see the central pulmonary artery here. This one. This is a central pulmonary artery. So they have incised these and connected to the confluence of the pulmonary artery, so as to create a single source of blood supply to the lungs. And after doing this, at the ultimately they are going to establish RV to PA conduit, so that from RV all of these segments get perfused. So and single source of blood supply is achieved. Okay.
Then when do you embolize MAPCAS?
Yeah, MAPCAS are embolized whenever there is excessive MAPCAS, or there are single segments supplied by multiple MAPCAS causing signs of heart failure. In such case, we have to do embolization of MAPCAS to reduce the pulmonary blood flow. That is, if there are signs of heart failure, excessive like single segment is supplied by multiple MAPCAS, then they will keep one MAPCA and rest of them they will embolize.
Before surgery, after surgery?
Before. It should be done before.
How to do that?
But sometimes I think in the year they do after surgeries also. If the post-surgical patient is developing, not improving, going for RV failure, or if they are having the pleural effusion, our surgeons implicated commonly to the MAPCAS, and then I think few cases we had seen taking them for MAPCA embolization after surgery also. Usually in the same setting that has to be done, like MAPCAS has to be closed, and immediate next day or the same day they will send them for surgery. That is how one case was done here. And post surgery also was one case was seen because the patient was going for recurrent pleural effusion because of heart failure. So the surgeons implicated it for MAPCAS, and angio was done. The MAPCAS were there and that were embolized. Then this indications for interventions for this TOF with pulmonary atresia. So TOF with pulmonary atresia is classified into 4 types. That is, type A is short segment pulmonary atresia with PDA. Type B is long segment pulmonary atresia with PDA. Type C is long segment pulmonary atresia with confluent branch pulmonary artery supplied by with confluent branch PAs supplied by MAPCAS. And type D is long segment pulmonary atresia with non-confluent branch PA, and the lungs are supplied by MAPCAS. So short segment and less 3 or long segment. In the first one and second one, there are PDAs, and in third C and D, the difference is confluent branch PA is present in C, non-confluent branch PA in D. So these are the 4 types A, B, C, D. So what are their managements? So presentation with significant cyanosis at less than 1 year of age, aortopulmonary shunt, that is aortopulmonary shunt or PDA stenting is done. Pulmonary shunt is given class 2A or class 1 indication, and PDA stenting is given as class 2A indication. No role of RVOT stenting as pulmonary atresia is present in these cases. And one more thing is in short segment pulmonary atresia, if there is a membranous obstruction, they can even consider the perforation of the membrane. That's why usually here they have not RV2 pulmonary artery conduit is not required after first intervention, or those presenting more than 1 year total correction of the at about 1 year of age, since RV2 PA conduit is not required. So by about 1 year after palliative surgery, once the pulmonary arteries become adequate size, we can just consider them for total corrective repair. Then coming on to, that is, we have to perforate the we have to open up the atretic segment and establish RV2 PA blood flow through the native RV2 PA. The RV2 PA conduit is not required in type 1. Then coming on to type 2, long segment pulmonary atresia with PDA. Presentation with significant cyanosis at less than age 1 year. Then we have to consider aortopulmonary shunting or PDA shunting, palliative shunting. Then after first intervention, or in those presenting at age more than 1 year, go ahead with optimal. If the pulmonary blood flow is optimal with good sized pulmonary arteries, go with total repair with RV2 PA conduit at 3 to 4 years of age. If the pulmonary blood flow is suboptimal with small pulmonary arteries, additional shunt followed by total repair at 3 to 4 years of age, that is once the pulmonary arteries become of adequate size. Then if there is increased pulmonary blood flow with large pulmonary atresia, total repair of RV2 PA conduit at 1 year. This is one condition where we have to do MAPCA embolization, and total repair with RV2 PA conduit by 1 year. Sorry, large pulmonary arteries. Increased pulmonary blood flow with large pulmonary arteries, total repair with the RV2 PA conduit by 1 year, you can do it. So, and in these cases, MAPCAS may have to be embolized. Then coming on to type C, long segment pulmonary atresia with confluent branch PAs and supplied by and lung supplied by MAPCAS. So if it is a neonatal presentation, aorto pulmonary shunt plus unifocalization of MAPCAS or RV2 PA conduit keeping VSD open. Then after first intervention or late presentation, optimal pulmonary blood flow with good sized pulmonary arteries. Then total repair with RV2 PA conduit VSD closure is done at 3 to 4 months. The borderline pulmonary arteries with large MAPCAS, do the unifocalization and RV2 PA conduit at 6 to 12 months. Or total repair with RV2 PA conduit VSD closure at 3 to 4 years. So increased pulmonary blood flow and large PA single stage repair can be performed where unifocalization of the MAP class plus RV to PA conduit plus VSD closure at 1 year of age when the weight is more than 10 kg. So unifocalization is done either at the part of palliative procedure or as a total corrective surgery. If we are going to close the VSD and if that is the total correction surgery, then unifocalization becomes as a part of total corrective repair. If you are not closing the VSD, like in this case where VSD is not closed, I don't know, keeping the VSD open. See, like in neonatal presentation, we are going to do aortopulmonary shunting plus unifocalization, and RV to PA conduit also will keep, but VSD we will not close here. In such case, this unifocalization just becomes a palliative procedure, and the total corrective repair will be done later when VSD is closed. Type D is long segment pulmonary atresia with non-confluent branch PAs applied by MAPCAS. Neonatal presentation, we have to do aortopulmonary shunting and unifocalization of the MAPCAS. And after first intervention, or first presentation, if it is 6 to 12 months, RV to PA conduit plus unifocalization is done. And if the pulmonary arteries are of adequate size, like at about 3 to 4 months of age, then total repair with RV to PA conduit and VSD closure is done. So to call it as a total repair, VSD closure has to be done. Then some important consideration, MAPCAS more than 2 mm in size are suitable for unifocalization. Then PDA stenting should not be done in the presence of branch PA stenosis. Branch PA stenosis, that is one thing. Then third thing is additional procedures which may be required in selected cases such as embolization of aortopulmonary collaterals only if the lungs are supplied by dual supply, stenting of the MAPCAS, that is if the MAPCA is supplying a single segment and that has got stenosed, then stenting of the MAPCAS may also be considered, and balloon dilatation with or without stenting of the branch pulmonary arteries may have to be considered. Okay. Then coming on to this thing. This is about mainly for post-TOF pulmonary regurgitation. What are the guidelines? This they are given in this American College of Cardiology guidelines. So adult with post-op repair with severe pulmonary regurgitation. Cardiac MRI is the one which is first how to evaluate them and how to treat them. Cardiac MRI is useful to quantify ventricular size, function, pulmonary valve function assessment. Then coronary artery compression testing is indicated before RV to PA conduit stenting or transcatheter placement in repaired TOF. Then programmed ventricular stimulation may be useful in stratifying the patient with TOF and increasing for reducing the risk of sudden cardiac death. And so these are the things. And in patients with repaired TOF, cardiac catheterization with angiography is indicated if reasonable to assess the hemodynamics when adequate data cannot be obtained non-invasively in the setting of arrhythmia, heart failure, unexplained LV dysfunction, etc. Then coming on to pulmonary valve replacement surgery or percutaneous for relief of symptoms is indicated as a class 1 indication in symptomatic patients. So pulmonary valve replacement, either surgical or percutaneous, is indicated when the patient is symptomatic. Then pulmonary valve replacement, surgical or percutaneous, reasonable for preservation of ventricular size and function in asymptomatic patients with repaired TOF and ventricular enlargement or RV dysfunction or moderate and greater pulmonary regurgitation. In symptomatic patients, class 1 indication. In asymptomatic patients with RV dilatation or dysfunction, or if there is more than moderate PR, then it is class 2 indication. Primary prevention ICD therapy is reasonable in adults with ICD with multiple risk factors for sudden cardiac death, like prolongation of QRS, RV dysfunction, LV dysfunction. If multiple risk factors are there, then they can be considered for ICD implantation as a class 2 indication. Then surgical pulmonary valve replacement may be reasonable for adults with repaired TOF with moderate or greater PR and other lesions requiring surgical interventions. Like if they have RVOT restenosis, then they may require surgery. That becomes class 2B indication. Pulmonary valve replacement in addition to arrhythmia management may be considerable for adults with repaired TOF and moderate or greater PR and ventricular tachyarrhythmias as a class 2B indication. There is a flowchart for TOF with pulmonary regurgitation. First, we have to assess the severity, whether it with the severity of and assess the LV and RV function. So if there is patient is symptomatic, evaluate by adult cyanotic congenital heart disease cardiologist, advanced heart failure team, and this is a class 1 indication to get thoroughly evaluated. If it is not, then and severe PR is present and patient is not symptomatic, then we'll look whether it is mild PR or moderate PR. If it is mild PR, just follow up is sufficient. If it is moderate or more PR, moderate or severe PR, then it is a class 1 indication. And patient is having symptoms, it is a class 7 indication. Moderate and severe PR and not having symptoms, then we have to look for other factors like RV dilatation, regurgitant fractions, and other things. So this includes mild to moderate RV dysfunction or LV systolic dysfunction, then RV dilatation, RV end diastolic volume index more than 160 ml per meter square, or RV end systolic index more than 80 ml per meter square, or RV end diastolic volume is more than 2 times LV end diastolic volume, or RV systolic pressure is due to RV-OT obstruction is more than 2/3 of the systemic pressures, or if there is progressive duration, progressive reduction in exercise capacity, then we have to consider for pulmonary valve replacement as a class 2A indication. Then if it is not there, then look for other risk factors such as sustained arrhythmia, which is also considered as a class 2B indication for pulmonary artery replacement, because sustained RV dysfunction is one of the risk factor for sustained tachyarrhythmias. So by doing pulmonary valve replacement, RV function may improve and the risk of arrhythmia may reduce. That is a proposed reason they have. That is a reason they have given. Then if that is also not there, look for any residual lesions that require surgical interventions like RVOT obstruction or tricuspid regurgitation and other things. If you are addressing those lesions along with that, doing pulmonary valve replacement will be a class 2B indication. If that is also not there, just follow up with the routine follow up. Then as per Indian guidelines, what is the indications for pulmonary valve replacement in post TOF PR patients? Symptomatic patients with symptoms attributable to RV overload and moderate to severe pulmonary regurgitation, it is class 1 indication. Asymptomatic patients with any one of the following: mild to moderate RV dysfunction, severe RV dilatation. Same values are given here also, more than 160 ml per meter square for RV end diastolic volume index, and RV end systolic volume index more than 80 ml per meter square. Then right ventricular systolic pressure more than 2/3 of the systolic pressure, progressive reduction in the objective exercise capacity, sustained tachyarrhythmia, residual lesions requiring surgical interventions, everything is same. Now, one important thing to remember is it is not there in any guidelines, but few centers follow this. QRS duration is also taken into consideration for considering for PVR. If there is QRS duration is more than 180 milliseconds, or per decade, if the increase is more than 5 milliseconds, that is associated with increased risk of having sudden cardiac death. And few centers consider if there is the successful follow-up, if there is a prolongation of QRS duration, that also some people consider it as a indication for pulmonary valve replacement. Then recommendation for follow-up of post-surgical patients. All patients require lifelong follow-up. Asymptomatic patients with no residual lesions but with free PR not requiring intervention should be followed up 1 to 2 years. Then clinical assessment, ECG, echocardiography to be done in all follow-up. Holter monitoring is indicated only in selected patients with suspected arrhythmias, either ventricular or atrial arrhythmias. Cardiac catheterization should be performed if any residual lesion is suspected. But it may also be required for percutaneous intervention such as stenting of the pulmonary artery branches for stenosis. Cardiac MRI is an important investigation for follow-up. In asymptomatic patients, baseline should be performed 10 years after repair with periodic follow-up with frequency of repeat imaging determined by anatomical and physiological factors. Especially in the patient in whom transalveolar patch is used and there is free PR, more frequent assessment of RV function and PR is required. In such a case, MRI is the investigation of choice for assessing the need for pulmonary valve replacement. Those who have undergone a prosthetic pulmonary valve replacement require periodic monitoring of anticoagulation. However, bioprosthetic valves are more commonly used in pulmonary valve position, and this does not require long-term anticoagulation. Infective endocarditis is indicated in all cases of unrepaired TOF and in repaired TOF where conduits are used. Then long-term good oral hygiene has to be maintained. Then coming on to long-term prognostic markers, increased cardiothoracic ratio, QRS duration more than 180 milliseconds. Requirement for transannular patch are associated with poor prognostic markers. If the rate of progression is more than 5 milliseconds per year over 10 years, that is also a poor prognostic marker and is also associated with increased risk of sudden cardiac death. Then coming briefly about this adult TOF, what are the factors related to longevity? Who are the patients who are likely to survive long? So it is moderate, those with moderately slow development of subpulmonary obstruction. That is the pink TOF patients, who have relatively lesser severe sign RVOT obstruction, and those with extra cardiac shunts, either in the form of PD or aortopulmonary collaterals. These are the one who reach the adulthood. In adult, AR can happen due to following mechanisms. So AR is one of the complications that commonly occurs in adults. So it is due to dilatation of the aortic annulus or the aortic root. It occurs because aorta is receiving combined output of both the ventricles. Secondly, it can be due to deformed aortic valve secondary to infective endocarditis. Or aortic valve deformity can also occur at the time of VSD closure during TOF repair. Then right coronary cusp prolapse. These are the three common reasons for aortic regurgitation in adult TOF. Then biventricular dysfunction occurs whenever there is aortic regurgitation. Coming on to Abraham series, which we need to remember, 147 patients of adult TOF were followed over a period of 8 years. Male to female ratio were 2:1. In this series, dyspnea was found in 95% of the population, aortic regurgitation 7%, hypertension 9.5%. The continuous murmur was found in 16.3%. Cardiomegaly in chest X-ray was found in 25%. Right-sided aortic arch in 10.9%. Then right atrial enlargement on ECG. This I think when Sridhar sir was asking. So 30%, and RV end diastolic pressure elevated in 24%. So important thing to be remembered is this AR they tend to 7%, dyspnea 95%. And another thing, this one, right atrial enlargement 30% and cardiomegaly 25%. These things they tend to ask us, and continuous murmur 16.3%. Then coming on to Fallot's physiology, cyanosis with reduced pulmonary blood flow with normal pulmonary artery pressure. How will you define Fallot's physiology? It is a cyanosis with decreased pulmonary blood flow occurring with the VSD and right ventricular outflow tract obstruction. But as a result, since there is a right ventricular outflow tract obstruction, they will have normal pulmonary artery pressure. Any other better definition for Fallot's physiology? This is what was given in Kamal Sharma. Any other better definition? Hello? Huh?
Arun,
Hello? Yeah, Arun.
Continue.
No, I want to know any other better definition is there for Fallot's physiology. What happened?
No, I think that's good enough. No, pretty much all standard.
Okay.
You mean you're asking if there are more types of Fallot physiology?
No, I'm asking definition. What the examiners expect us
He's
to tell.
asking for a better definition.
Oh, better. Okay. I think it's good enough. I don't know what others feel.
Okay. Then it includes TOF with DORV VSTPS and DTGA VSTPS and CCTGA VSTPS, single ventricle PS, AV canal defect PS. This AV canal defect PS, some people consider, some won't consider, and tricuspid atresia with normally related great vessels and VSTPS. This one to be told last. So an important thing is this difference between TOF and DORV VST. Clinically, it may be difficult to differentiate between the two. ECG will give a good evidence. If the right axis deviation is more than 150 degree, more likely to be DORV, and if it is between 120 to 150 degree, more likely to be TOF. Then coming on to echo parameters, if the aorta overriding
and also
is,
this ECG transition from V1 to V2.
V1 to V2.
That will be there in TOF. In DORV, it won't be there. I think that any.
Rapid transition, gradual transition, they have given. So ECG wise, I think one is axis, second one is gradual transition versus in DORV versus rapid transition in TOF. Prolonged PR interval can happen in DORV, but not so in TOF. Then counterclockwise depolarization occurs here, that won't be seen. Then presentation with cyanosis will be early in DORV and relatively delayed in TOF. prognosis of DORV is worse compared to TOF, and TOF has better prognosis. Shunt murmur, it will be a obligatory murmur. Here, the shunt murmur usually won't be present. Coming on to shunt physiology, some anatomically left to right and physiologically right to left. I don't know what they meant. Then this one is right to left shunt. VST, it can be either subaortic, subpulmonic, or doubly committed VST. Here it will be always subaortic VST. And the other thing is, I think in the right third intercostal space, if there is a pulsation, one of the causes this TORV we have to suspect. Right third intercostal space, if there is pulsation, then one more that is likely to happen in DORV than TOF.
Because of?
Hmm?
Because of what? That pulsation?
Infundibular stenosis won't be there, no, that's why. Infundibulum will be relatively of better size. In the TOF, infundibular stenosis will be there. Here, the level of obstruction will be usually at valvular level, no? So infundibulum will be of good size. So left third intercostal space, maybe, pulsation may be present.
Okay.
Pulsation or thrill. Then coming on to other TOF physiologies, coming on to TOF, it will have a favorable streaming. That is, I know favorable stream from RV to PA and LV to aorta streaming will be there. Small size aorta and no cardiomegaly on chest X-ray. Where there will be RV type of apex. Then aortic pulsation will be present in left third intercostal space, and there will be palpable P2. Then coming on to the systolic murmur, usually described as mid-systolic murmur, and the intensity of the murmur and duration. I discussed this with Madam. Madam told both intensity as well as duration is inversely related to severity of sinus. It's better to tell like that. Then coming on to RV, ECG shows RVH with right axis deviation, with the right axis deviation. Chest X-ray, already told, you can see smaller normal size heart with the right sided aortic arch, prominent pulmonary bay. In DORV, favorable streaming. DORV with TOF physiology will have favorable streaming. Then there will be minimal or no cardiomegaly, RV type of apex, more cyanosis, early presentation, counterclockwise rotation, more than 150 degree, PR interval prolongation, absence of rapid transition, mild QRS widening can be seen. Here the cardiac size can chest X-ray can be normal. Then coming on to DORV with subpulmonic VST. This actually comes under TGA physiology. We did not have to, that its presentation is quite different. It is also going to present with early onset cyanosis. Then coming on to TGA with VSTPS, unfavorable TGA physiology, there will be moderate cardiomegaly, and actually this kind of TGA has got better survival compared to isolated TGA without isolated TGA with VST, where there will be increased pulmonary blood flow. Here pulmonary stenosis gives protection for lungs. So they will have a loud murmur, intense cyanosis. They will have right ventricular hypertrophy, extreme right axis deviation. Some amount of cardiomegaly will be present in this. Single ventricle VST-PS, single ventricle PS, there will have LV type of apex. It's the admixture physiology. Early onset cyanosis will be there. The L transposition of aorta can be seen. And in ECG, there will be a clue in the form of monotonous stereotypic QRS complex in V1 to V6. That is, in V1 to V6, the QRS complex will be of same morphology without any progression. That is the thing that is classically described with single ventricle PS. Then coming on to, these are the important types. Rest all single ventricle of RV type PS, and that is less common. And tricuspid atresia, normally rated great arteries with VST-PS. Here again there will be LV type of apex, and it will be administrative physiology. There will be pansystolic murmur due to restrictive VST at the left lower sternal border. There will be left ventricular hypertrophy, so left axis deviation will be there. Clinically, left type of LV type of apical impulse will be there, and on X-ray also we can see LV type of cardiomegaly. Then LTGA VST-PS is another thing, that is CCTGA VST-PS. Here there will be a favorable flow, no cardiomegaly unless they develop the left avial regurgitation. Medially, so in this case, the RV will be towards the left side, and I will be forming the apex. The L malposition of aorta is seen in 100% of the cases. The loud murmur, mild cyanosis due to unfavorable streaming occurs. So cyanosis will be mild. Right ventricular dominance occurs and because RV will be situated, will be supplying the systemic circulation, so RV dominance occurs, then these individuals are at risk of having AV blocks. So X-ray wise, the normal sized heart, L aorta on the left cardiac border, L transposition of aorta can be seen. Yeah, that's it.
Nice discussion, Arun. Thank you.
Then
Arun,
Hmm.
regarding this in top surgeries, this regarding this conduit, somewhere it was given. Where it was given? Conduits.
Which one?
Conduit.
What
I mean,
conduit?
I want to know what will be the natural history of the conduit.
Conduits
how,
and all.
Yeah, how long it will survive? 10 years. If they degenerate, whether they present as stenosis or regurgitation.
That one, this one, I think that this book is there. No, what is that?
Generally, in
Anderson.
Okay.
Anderson, some amount of information is there, but they are given mainly those studies and all. So I didn't write it with much. And then another thing, one article I got, there they have given RVOT stenosis, how the progression, the rate of RVOT stenosis progression. More often it is PR, that is the most common complication need to be addressed. RVOT in one of the study, I think some 80% of the patient had PR, out of which some 20% required reoperation because it was severe PR over a period of 20 years. And RVOT stenosis was found only in about 20% of the patients, and in majority it was mild to moderate.
These numbers are with this transannular patch or resection or with conduits?
Conduit.
Okay.
Transannular patch will always have pulmonary regurgitation.
Yeah, from the starting itself they have.
From the starting itself, they will have free PR, which may cause RV dilatation, RV dysfunction, and patient may become symptomatic. If at all it does not happen, which is rare to happen, then patient does not require anything. But usually, in the long run, most of them will require pulmonary valve replacement. Transannular patch means while doing this ventriculotomy, they will do ventriculotomy and while doing infundibular resection, no, the same infundibular incision, they will extend to the pulmonary annulus. As a result, so as to overcome the obstruction and to make the annulus larger. So the anatomy of the annulus will be lost and patient will end up with severe pulmonary regurgitation. Lokesh?
No. Arun. Hey, nothing. Thank you. Nice presentation. I think very less number of people have logged in.
Yeah.
I think it was very useful.
Close by, you know.
No, but still, very nice. You prepared very well. So thank you.
Nice compilation, Arun.
Yeah, true.
Thank you.
Arun. When is your actual top presentation in class?
Why?
Next week, huh?
Next week, I think Monday.
Okay.
I hope I will not get same clinical case.
Mokta has messaged, no, this thing that TOF with absent pulmonary valve will not have that sudden transition.
TOF with absent pulmonary valve, what happens?
Regarding this V1 to V2 transition will be there, no, sudden transition. She has
that is
typed,
mainly discussed for classical TOF.
Yeah, she has typed that it will not be there in case
those
of
comments. I didn't see the comments. Just a minute, I'll see those. I'll just go through and
screenshots.
What is it? US, UK?
No,
okay,
that is
Varun, you need to close.
For surgery. Age for surgery.
Okay.
US, I think he just put Lokesh has put the first breath, which is probably
first breath. Abrupt transition won't be there in our wave. This is for
correct.
In TOF with absent pulmonary valve, that won't be there.
No, that sudden transition is well explained for classical TOF, no? For other things,
Yeah.
Oh.
So Anushant, I think that is done for hypoplastic left heart syndrome. I think that is also.
No, it's just like just an alternative for a central shunt. That's all.
RV to PA only, no? That is also
RV to PA. RV to PA. Only problem is a ventriculotomy has to be made for a Sano. So some recent issues, recent commentary on how Sano is probably not all that great. I will send you that article if you're preparing.
Lokesh.
Yeah.
Lokesh?
Ma'am told to give sodium bicarbonate first, huh?
Yeah.
Usha madam.
I mean, in the drugs, as soon as I said IV fluid first, in the after doing the knee chest position, calming, trying to calm the baby, etc. As soon as I said IV fluid, she pounced on me saying give bicarbonate first because that will act on CNS also. In addition to fluid, then you give fluid.
Which one? Bicarbonate.
Bicarbonate.
Okay.
Lokesh, this RVOT stenting, which was you are telling, you will not put across the pulmonary
valve. It is kept across the valve.
Below the valve it will be.
Okay, you are telling it will be usually below the valve, but if you are
not in all the cases, huh? Sometimes
it goes above the valve.
Below the valve means only in the infundibular portion they will be keeping it.
Ideally, we are supposed to.
It is not easy as PTCA to precisely position it in RVOT.
I know. Very difficult.
Yeah,
and most of the time it goes, and if at all they are doing it for, and one more thing is this RVOT stenting, they do it as a the foundation for doing pulmonary valve, transcatheter pulmonary valve replacement. I think in such case they will place it
to prepare the bed.
The valve.
So you will have to, you will have to place it. Sometimes even
across the valve.
3 or 4 stents are placed. So
in such case they will place it across the valve.
Yeah, and sometimes 3 or 4 stents are placed across the annulus. Yeah.
That is in adults, no? That
adults. Yeah. When we are doing a PVR, transcatheter PVR, melody and all. I think even in our case, no, that Sachin, Arun, your case, your patient, I think they had prepared, no, they had put an RVOT. I mean, they put stent first and then they put a MyVal.
How is he? Had come for follow up anytime.
Hey, he came back 2-3 times for follow up. He has developed pretty bad UTI actually.
UTI, yeah.
He had some EO, UTI, something. He's not
UTI,
normal.
Hey, this thing I wanted to know. Tomorrow case presentation is there. What is this thing? Valvular or congenital?